So I think that's a good question because I think there is this kind of misunderstanding at times from social workers that it's actually something that is naturally within us and that it comes really naturally to be a reflective practitioner. So I think for some people, it will come naturally. Some people will be naturally reflective, but for others, it is something, a skill that needs to be practiced and developed, and you need to find what works for you. And I think reflection comes in so many different forms that we can get into a habit of thinking, oh, this is reflective practice and I do it because I use this model. Whereas actually it can be so many different things. It can be about what you're writing, a reflective journal, a reflective discussion. It can be about having that critical friend. So I think it's just such a bigger thing than some people think about. And it's about having that space to practice, really.
Yeah. I suppose what I've taken from that and what you've said there is maybe actually for some people it might be easy, but for other people it's not. And most of the people I've met in my career, it's not an easy thing to do. But I suppose that takes us back to the beginning where we talked about this is quite a complex and layered thing, being reflective. So of course it's not easy when it's complex and layered. Maybe if you want to do it on a surface level, it's easy, but actually the deeper you want to take it, the more difficult and more challenging that can become. And I think it's interesting as well that you talked there about models. And I wonder whether sometimes, as you say, there are so many different models of reflection out there, but actually in our training, we tend to just be taught a couple of models of reflection. And sometimes I think whether this is actually said at university or whether it's just what students hear, but a lot of students will say to me, but we were told that is reflection, rather than that's a model of reflection. That's one way of reflecting. People are told here, this is the way to reflect. And if that model doesn't work for them, then they think, oh, I'm not a reflective practitioner, or I struggle to be reflective or something. But actually, as you've said, I think we've all got to work at it. And we've all got to find a model that works for us. And sometimes it can be a very simple model, like what, why, how. And sometimes you want to use a much more complex model to look at something. And different models work for different things. If you want to reflect on just a single incident, then there's some really good models. If you want to reflect on over a longer period of time, maybe, the last 3 months that I've been working with this family, then you're going to want to use a different model. So I think it's not easy because it's complex, but I think there are things that you can do to make it easier for yourself. As you say, really, it's about practicing it, keeping on doing it, really, isn't it? And it's also about being open to new ideas and new models. And there might be a model that's worked for you for years, but then maybe you need to freshen it up a bit, because is it still reflection if you're just doing the same model all the time? If you're just structuring your thought process in the same way, in a way, it's almost become a bit process or proceduralized. And so maybe mixing it up a bit. So it's not easy. It needs to be kept fresh. It needs to be worked on, but also it's worth that work. It's worth that effort. It's really worth putting the work in to become more reflective, I think.
Definitely. And I think over the course of the project, I felt myself kind of growing in terms of my confidence in relation to reflective practice and understanding reflection in a different way. And I liked what you were saying in terms of trying the different things out, because I think sometimes you can maybe try a model out and you don't quite get it or you don't quite gel with it, but then you might approach it on a different day and get something completely different from it. So I think it's really interesting to be able to play about with it a bit and just develop that confidence, really, as well as the skill.
Yeah, absolutely. And playing about with it, that's a lovely way of putting it, because, within the project, when we brought the social workers together to create their own models, and really it does feel a bit like you're playing with something when you're making your own model and you're developing it. But you could almost see the growth in confidence when people talked about their own models. And I've seen that a lot in my own practice, that people often are more confident about talking reflectively when they've developed their own model, because they almost understand, well, what they're thinking about. And I think it can be quite empowering in a way to do that, to create your own model.
Definitely.